Being Friday, I'm sure there's a lot of people who'd love to be spending some time with their families and, maybe just catching up on some emails or maybe doing some work. So if there's any questions for our speakers, the panel's up here. The challenge is we've only got one microphone. Yay, Cape Town Stadium. So the guys in the back, unfortunately, we're not going to be taking any questions from you guys. So, yeah, you're going to have to, yeah, travel later. But yeah, is there any questions for any of our speakers? Starting now. Does any of our speakers want to get the audience started on anything? Oh, Phil, thanks a lot, man.
You're a brave woman. Okay, so I said to Sam and Karen that I think we need... Wow, I sound like a Dalek. We need to exterminate. Okay, there we go. That we need them to lay out the format of a sprint using Agile UX. So who's doing what at what point, and how would that work? And they seem to think that they could do that with almost no preparation. So that's my challenge to them.
Okay. Oh, I don't need a mic, apparently.
Well, I'm holding it here. I can hear you.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Can you hear Karen talk? Can you hear me?
Yes.
See, I don't need to close to the mic. Okay, so, well, we're going to go in order of the meetings. I'm going to tell you what should be happening in a meeting, and Karen's going to mention some UX stuff. I'm going to check with Phil if that's the UXy stuff that's the stuff I think people would do in that meeting, and he's going to tell us if that seems like the right stuff to do to answer those questions.
You can't turn your head away.
Oh, you confer with your colleagues. Okay, so first meeting, backlog grooming or backlog refinement. This is the meeting where the team is trying to understand the requirements and understand the why behind the requirements. And the UX person should be doing... Well, first I want to say, when we talked about the kickoff meeting at the start of the project, it's really just a bigger backlog grooming session to create your first backlog. So this is the same for the kickoff meeting as that. So I think in this meeting you might be creating personas. You might have done some research before for that, or in your previous sprint interview those. So you might be creating personas. You might be filling out a customer journey map a little bit, like the high level of what is it that they're actually trying to achieve and why are they even using our product. What are some other things you do to answer the why and understand requirements in UX?
Okay, I'll give it a shot.
Storytelling. Great one.
Well, yeah, storytelling. I just want to say, I think it's important, again, like you mentioned earlier, it's working together. So when it is started, your UX people are involved with the business analysts, for example, getting those requirements from the start, getting the scoping sessions going. What we've done recently, during a first scoping session, finding out what this whole project is about, we invite everybody. So
we'd call that a backlog grooming, same thing.
Yeah. So in the past, it would be just, for example, the product owner and the client, and there would be all confusion later on in the project. So yeah, has been a big win.
Okay, so I work with the gentleman at the back that, there you go, Farai, asked all the questions, yes. And we're freshly into this, the whole agile methodology. And I think one of the interesting things for me is that in those initial kickoff sessions, when you're looking at the story map and the tasks under each one of those, that's interesting for me because as a UX practitioner, that's where you really can kind of help shape what this thing should do and how it should behave, and do that with your techs and tech leads and product manager, and that's cool. We haven't really fully gotten that right yet. But I think that's real potential, and you keep on getting that initial stage is crucial in how the thing shapes up.
I think something that's quite important is that backlog grooming is not the business analyst or the product owner brings their already fleshed out requirements and just tells you what they are. It's where the entire team, including the UX and the developers and everyone, contributes to crafting those requirements. It doesn't just have to happen in one short meeting. Backlog grooming is an ongoing process. So it might be, we've got some outstanding questions, someone's going to go find that out from a user and come back, and together we'll craft it. So it's not, you have to have the perfect requirements going in. You need to know we want to do something in this space. Okay. There was a question over there. Yes.
Who was it? Show your hand.
We've been having this discussion at our work where we wanted to open up new opportunities for UX developers. And for me it was a bit confusing because I've only been exposed to UX designers. So I wanted to know, is there a difference between the two? Is there a difference between a UX designer and a developer, or is it the same thing?
Sorry, I just wanted to push your eardrums there.
Is there like an add-on question you want to add on to that right now? Oh, he has an answer. Better than a question.
Oh, yeah! Give him a round of applause.
This is just a personal opinion of mine, but you hear the term unicorn being thrown around a lot, and people often come from either a visual background or a coding background, and it's either or. At the end of the day, it's job description, what you do there and then in the job, because there's only limited amount of time. Someone has to be responsible for making the calls on the UX, and someone has to be responsible for developing it. But that said, it's a constant conversation. All departments should collaborate, and I mean, the job description or title should just really be there for the sake of organizational structure, if that makes sense.
Just to add to that, if you are a UX developer, please come and see me. It sounds amazing. Yeah, I think Phil also touched on it at the start. The word UX designer is even very broad. Werner, Janse van Rensburg did one of our earlier UX craft talks where he described all the different UX activities. And there, in my view, there's no one person that can do everything. Maybe if you're a startup and you're one guy, you're interested, but at the end of the day, there's different skills, and a developer can know about all these UX things, or some knowledge, but you would definitely need to speak to your users. Also, something that's been said before you can call yourself UX anything.
Maybe a UX developer is just a developer who's spoken to a user.
Just for the idiots in the room, such as myself, what is a backlog? And also, am I understanding correctly that this backlog refinements meeting could actually be seen as a journey? So it could happen over a few meetings. Okay.
So backlog is just a list of work to be done in a prioritized order. So really, really important priority. So you normally work off the top. And yes, what Sam and I teach is that for an item on that backlog, before it goes into a sprint, it should have been through grooming 3 times. So yes, absolutely iterative, adding more detail each time. So you would do the same thing with the things you're doing, all of your UX things that you're doing. You would have another stab at the persona and another stab at the persona before it gets to the final version. Yes. Okay. Shall we carry on? So we've now got this backlog, and we've talked through it, and we've done some of your UXE customer journey maps and
personas, and now the next day we're going to start the sprint.
So the start of your sprint starts with sprint planning, and there's 2 parts to it. So let's talk about part 1. Sprint planning part 1 is what we call the what meeting. What are we going to do?
So I think this is the one I struggled with the most with the UX stuff, so I'm going to ask for some help. I think one of the things we do in sprint planning part 1 is we talk about acceptance criteria, and I think a UX-y thing you might do there is define what are you going to measure, so what is your hypothesis you're going to test, and what metrics are you going to test to check if this requirement actually meets what the user needs. What else do you guys do to define the what of what you're doing? So not the how, we're not talking about the design yet, but what the actual requirement is. The hypothesis.
So the hypothesis thing seems to be what people are recommending, because it does have this measurement criterion in it, which is really important, and it's got the assumptions and the reasoning and all that stuff, which you said can get lost, or somebody said can get lost as well when you get right down to the user stories. So that seems important. Going back to what you said about the story map, yeah? So story mapping is really, really useful, and I don't know how many people know about story mapping. A small number. Okay, so story mapping is you basically lay out sticky notes to tell the story of major user journeys. Sorry, they go that way. A major user journey through your software. So the tasks that a user might do in order to reach their goal, and then maybe browse for books, add to shopping cart, check out, for example. And then the development team can list, okay, well, here are the ingredients that we're going to need to create, design, and develop, dangling down below each step in this journey. So you can see the user journey, does this make sense to a customer? And you can see the implementation effort requirements checklist, if you like, dangling down below each step of the story map. So that's a great artifact because it's shared on the wall, and it's compatible with the UX thinking and the service and the customer experience thinking of the journey that the customer goes on, and with the developer thinking of the list of jobs we have to do. And it translates, if you like, between those two mindsets. So it's a really awesome thing, and probably one of the core things to make in a kickoff workshop. But anyway, back to where you were, which was the what workshop.
Yeah, so I think a hypothesis, really.
Okay, so the next one is sprint planning part 2, and that we call the how. So this is where everyone on the team talks about how they're going to deliver what they've just committed to. So this is where they draw on a whiteboard, design stuff. If I was a developer, I'd probably say I need to write a couple of unit tests. I'm going to test that the person's name is filled in. I'm going to test that when I click save, if an error message comes back, that it's displayed, and stuff like that.
So I think what you'd be doing here is potentially paper prototyping, maybe sketching what it's going to look like, if there's an information architecture structure, kind of where that fits in. And also talking about there's this thing we call the definition of done, which is what are the things we're going to do to say this is finished. Deciding how much of the work you're going to do in the sprint. So are you going to be doing user testing and usability in the sprint, or is that something you're going to do afterwards? So having a clarification that the whole team understands, are we getting this to the point that we can put it in front of a user, or are we actually putting it in front of the user, getting feedback and incorporating that feedback in the sprint? So it's where you talk about the detail of exactly what you're going to be doing. But the things you'd be doing, I guess, is sketching, paper prototyping. It's something you want to do in a few hours. So I don't know what else you've got in the how side.
Are these two meetings one after the other on day 2, and you've got until the end of day 2 to finish your sketches?
Depending how. So you don't have to finish them in this meeting. You just have to start.
You just have to start them, she said. So, okay, well, we better find out what happens on day 3.
That's a question, who sketches?
I don't
I just want to add a comment, and you can maybe add to that. One of the reasons UX came to be is because we do not involve enough time and energy at the start of a project on the user, how these things work. And it just seems to me that rushing through this in day 1, day 2, we are again leaving the whole UX thing behind. So I'd love to hear your response.
One of the reasons Agile came about is because we spent too much time up front making decisions about stuff we didn't know anything about. So we're saying, don't think you can know it before you've built it. Build it and then check with users if what you thought your hypothesis was is true. So we're saying don't try and do too much research before you have something. Get something quickly and then do the research of if it was the right thing and should you elaborate on it. Does that make sense? So the effort isn't upfront, the effort is ongoing and continuous, but it doesn't mean stay clear of the users, it just doesn't mean spend hours with the users.
If I can just play devil's advocate again, you get cheap methods like, actual prototyping, where you can spend, say, for example, a week, which is not the most time in the world necessarily. I just feel it can be a bit of a rush to just go, and I'm not sure if you mean by prototyping something like actual, but it sounds to me like you're going straight into dev, and I think that could be wasteful energy.
As I understand it, that those sprints are meant to not necessarily get to some kind of final thing, but to learn as quickly as possible. And if that answers that question. But what's interesting is that when you get to talking about how and what is done, then I've been in one of those sessions where it gets really, really heated because the testers and how much you test and how much needs to be tested before it's done, and what if it's not right when you've tested, and what goes into the backlog after you've tested, and what stays within the sprint or what goes to the next sprint. Those kind of discussions can be really, really complex and can get heated, and it's all about your team and how you want to approach the project, your pace, what's your appetite for taking on in a sprint, and it's calibrating. A lot of it's about calibrating the process around your team. And that's weird, right? Because people are used to working in these kind of rule-based systems. You do that now, and then you do that now, and you do so much of that before I can do this. But yeah, again, that's where the mindset shift happens, because here it's all about getting a feel for what works for us. And not just me doing me and you doing you, but us doing it together. It's a very altruistic way of looking at this kind of thing, maybe a bit hippie sometimes.
Okay, so after those 2 planning sessions, you would start your sprint, which means the team goes off and does the work. And what's followed closely by that is every morning they have a daily stand-up. Hands up if you know what a daily stand-up is, you've participated in one, excellent. So daily stand-up, the primary reason you have it is for the team to check in with each other, whether they are on track to reach their goal for the end of the sprint.
So one of the most important and probably the most misunderstood thing about sprints is that if you're going to work on 5 things in the sprint, 5 things off the backlog, it's not each person in the team picks one and work on that. You start at the top and everybody in the team tries to do what's necessary to finish the first one. So probably day 1 of your sprint, that will be the one that you did the sketching of in the Sprint Planning 2 meeting, so maybe the sketches are done and the developers are going to take that and start using the sketches. Maybe the UI, I'm just going to call them a person because now I'm confused. The UI UX, terrible failure bar, sorry. The UX person might pair with the developer to get the first kind of thing for that story up, and maybe the other people in the team will start doing some of the sketching or paper prototypes for the second story. And then the first one is done in development, and your testers already wrote the test because they're awesome, and you do test-driven development. And then the whole team kind of focuses on story number 2, and maybe that's the day your user comes in and you go, oh, well, we've actually finished a story, so let's usability test story number 1 with the user who's on site today. So that's kind of what might happen in a sprint, and you keep going until you got to the end.
That was good.
Oh, question.
So I have a question that's been brooding, and I'm going to try and be clear and coherent, which is going to be hard. So I've been through this process with a very, very complicated project, and I've made a hell of a lot of mistakes. And what I'm trying to ascertain is, okay, so if you're talking about the what of the project, in my case, we were trying to do something where, sure, you can create your personas and you can understand, basically, I want to do this kind of product. But what wasn't anticipated is that actually a hell of a lot of knowledge about this. So that particular product had, when you went, so in my case it was an educational product, and people in the educational space don't actually agree about how this should be done. So there needed to be a step before and a lot of research to get to that step where you decided, okay, these are the 430 very, very vehemently disagreed upon ideas about how this should be done. And we are going to take this line, and that's why. And we kind of needed that clarity. And so what my question is, in a way, going through this process of story mapping helped get to that space. But it also meant a huge amount of frustration and not knowing, because it was almost like we weren't ready to story map yet. So how does one best, where in this kind of process does that kind of what research, where is the best place for that to take place? Is it best for you to start with the story mapping and then just, go out and do your thing and really fall around a lot to find your way? Or should you really understand that what in an incredible amount of detail before you start your story mapping for a product? Does that make any sense?
Thank you for the question. I think that's something a lot of people grapple with. If you truly don't know enough to even begin to know where to start, what you do have is a lot of questions. And perhaps your backlog is simply a bunch of questions that are in priority order and need to be answered. In which case, your sprint will be to answer those questions. And that might be, I don't know, let's say you're testing online training people, and you're not sure whether you should use the Udemy site or the Patience site. So maybe that means in your first sprint you're going to do a very basic one in both of them, so that you can make an informed decision by the end of the sprint which way you're going to go.
And then it will be a cycle. You can start again with the backlog when you have more clarity.
Yes, the backlog is a living document. It's living and breathing. It grows every day. It should be culled every day too.
And I think a story map is a great way to identify where do you have questions. So we know the user's going to do this. How are they going to get from there to there? Well, we don't know. Big question mark. Okay, we need to go and explore that question mark. The reasons for doing this, then rather just spending 3 months doing research, is a lot of what Agile is about is, it's often quoted the chaos report, which is that 60% of functionality is never or rarely used. Think about Excel. And so what we want to do is we don't want to spend any time on that 60%. We want to know what it is and stop doing it immediately. And if you spend 3 months researching the whole problem, probably 80% of that stuff you're going to throw away because you don't need it because it's not important. And so this approach of getting stuck into the most important stuff first means you'll never spend any time on that unnecessary stuff. So you flesh it out as you go along and you're iterating the whole time. Cool. Do you want to get to the end of the sprint, Sam?
Sorry, I'm hogging the mic. This is a problem we face within the company I work. Okay, so we break down everything into tickets, right? So a ticket goes to UX, then ticket goes to dev. But yeah, we use Jira. Okay, so generally speaking, a feature will be mapped out as an epic, which is a group of much larger stories, and each story should be a ticket. So one epic is basically a feature, and then it's broken up into slivers of the feature, which are tickets. The problem with that then is, by the time a ticket is actually complete by a dev, and a UX ticket might actually translate into a few more tickets for the dev to actually make it work, how do you then decide on what an actual ticket or feature is for everyone to work on at once to pool resources so that by the time you've gone through a 1 week or 2 week sprint, you actually have something you can test? Because a lot of the time we don't have stuff we can test. We need to get like 10 tickets through a sprint and then we can test something.
I just want to clarify because I'm not sure if I'm understanding you correctly. So are your tickets in Jira, does the UX person have a ticket and the developer have a separate ticket? Are they tickets at a task level?
So we'll have a ticket that deals with the sliver of that feature, and we'll create subtasks. So we have a UX subtask and then a dev subtask, but we'll all work on the same ticket requirement.
We're not talking about the subtasks here, though. You're talking about the sliver of the feature.
Yes.
So can you give me an example of a sliver of one of your features?
Okay, so drag and drop image assignments to media book. Okay, so let's say it's a project management system and you want to now take an image from a bucket of stuff you've got and drag it onto that list. In order to do that, there are many different steps for the developer to implement first to get to that final thing. And you can't necessarily just test that piece because it might be like that thing drags. There's no way to drag it to, and there's no user really to like get involved in testing it. You almost need to go through the whole epic first, which might have 10, 15 tickets, which is sometimes longer than a sprint.
So the trick is to find something, we like to say with every thin sliver, you want to find something that you can give feedback on. And we often have this debate with back-end developers who are like, but I wrote a script, there's nothing to show. And actually you can show that when you ran the script, did the database table change from this to this? Because a business person can look at that and go, yes, the right data is there. So by the same, is there something you can give feedback on that you can use to say it's going in the right direction? And then when you've put 5 of those slivers together and you get something that hangs together, part of the 5th sliver is also making sure those 5 slivers hang together. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, so it's almost like user testing within your company, between departments, before you actually put it to the user.
Maybe, depending on what your relationship with your users are. You might have good relationships with users where you can say, we haven't got that yet, this is where we're going, but can you at least tell us, is the dragging thing working? I know you're going to drag it and it's not going to do anything, but can you at least figure out how to move it from there to there? Is that intuitive? Something like that?
I think the success of that relies on people being prepared to be underwhelmed by development. Because a lot of time, like, a dev will do something and it'll be like, oh, I got the script to work and it does this thing. And people are like, okay, a number changed. Wow. That's amazing. I can do that in Excel. But if you have a cohesive team and the devs are allowed to play nice with everybody else, then they'll understand the excitement of the developer, and not the feature won't matter as much as the fact that the developer is excited about it, and that's what's important. So it's about helping your team to be fine with being underwhelmed by what the devs did, and only be overwhelmed when the whole thing comes together.
I've got a couple of things to say. Maybe I'll only get around to doing one of them. So running usability testing in Agile, the recipe that I'm currently using, and I think it's good, is that you schedule the usability test to happen at a certain point, same point every time in each sprint. And you schedule your users to be rocking up on that day, regardless of whether you know what the heck you're going to ask them or not. And then there are three things you can do with them. You can test past, present, and future. So past is where you get them to tell you the stories of things they have done and experiences they've had already in this space. And they can, that's sometimes called critical incident analysis. Yeah, tell me the time of when this was really bad, or tell me the last time you did this, or whatever, so that you can pick up increased depth about the task that you're trying to address. So that's kind of broad research. And then present is, oh, well, we've just shipped this feature, or we've just got this feature to a point where it makes sense to a human, so have a go at it. And future is, oh, I bashed together this wireframe as part of the sprint, and I want you to take a look at that and try using that for a while and see how good it is, or bad it is. And I think past, present, and future is it's a nice little recipe, and I think it's really difficult, though. As a usability tester, you've got to have your wits about you, because you're basically walking into usability tests with almost no preparation and a bunch of broken things. But once you get the hang of it and you realize that your usability test is going to be chaos and you must embrace the chaos, it can actually come out pretty good.
Just to add, thanks, Phil. A technique we often use is, say the 3 sprints. In the first and the second sprint, depending on the experience of your UX person on board, is to do a heuristic evaluation or expert evaluation, where you can try to, set the standards and review something from your Nielsen guidelines, your spool, all those sort of things, and get the product to work as closely as possible to those guidelines and standards, so that you know it will be, say, 90% right until the user sees it. So it's also just something that we use because sometimes you can't just put a product in front of a user if it's 50% right. That could confuse them. So that is a technique that's also available.
So if you chose to do that, your team might say, our definition done includes that we're this percentage compatible with that, and we're not even going to bother doing usability testing until we're there. So you can save a lot of time that way, sure.
I've got another question, which is, if I have to go on a trip to the Eastern Cape to check out how some of my target users are going to use the product and what they do with their daily lives, and the developers should come too, they're not going to get any time to write any code. What do you think about that?
So I don't think developers should just be code monkeys. I think it's more important that they understand the why behind what they're building, because too often we write too much crap code that goes nowhere. So we need to understand the why. But in that particular case, if the entire team could not, travel for 10 hours to some desolate area to check out users for 3 days and come back, maybe a video would help. And then everyone spends one day watching the video and coming up with things.
Or take one developer on the trip and leave the rest in the office.
What I'm really getting at is, if your developers aren't writing code, then you're not productive, right?
Wrong. So if you ask any developer if they had to rewrite a piece of code, again, knowing what they know now, how much faster would it be? Most of them would say it would take 1/10 of the time. So half of the time, developers are hitting keyboards and deleting code. If they get knowledge before they make all of those assumptions, it's a whole lot faster to code. So I think a trip to the Eastern Cape, understanding the users, discussing the requirements on the bus, and then getting back and coding it in a day is probably going to be the faster approach.
But on the note of productivity, it's a mind shift for those managers too.
If your developers bill by the hour, then they need to bill the time they're in the shower, because that's when most developers have their best ideas.
Oh dear.
Thank you. I wonder if I could ask a question on a slightly different track around developing services for very diverse user groups. I think both the last two speakers discussed, well, particularly in the public sector, there's an urge to design services that meet everyone's requirements. And it's a big no-no if you miss a minority group or, you know, the service must be released and meet everyone's requirements from the off. Whereas another approach might be to design a service quickly, get it out there, test it with one subset of the users, and then add other people kind of incrementally. I think you mentioned the fact that the site you were building had to be produced in 3 different languages, and then someone also mentioned the fact that in Johannesburg there's hundreds of different languages, and it's not just language differences, that maps onto very different cultural needs and cultural differences as well. So I guess, I don't know if there's a question in there. My question is, how do you address that problem? If you're trying really hard to get as close as possible to your users' needs and their particular specific needs, how do you produce services quickly that meets such a wide diversity of needs?
Thank you. Great question. I think that's exactly what Marcel also touched on. It might be easier to design a service for that weird population, you know, and get that into the Agile going. But it's really, and it's the question I also asked earlier, understanding your rural users can't happen in a day or two. This language thing, for example, you know, you need collaboration from universities, people who do their masters and theses on these things. Yeah, so I think there's sometimes you can put out, and you know, it's as easy as possible for the weird people to use, and you know, get some lower E-skilled people in the lab, see how they use it. So you can get the ease of use you can work on, but understanding your user, I think, takes a lot longer.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question to answer. It's not necessarily one that I've got an answer to. But you do have to kind of apply to a certain degree. I think there's 2 parts to it. One part is the easy way out, to say that you've got to apply a kind of an 80-20 rule. You know, 80% of your effort going into the 20% that really matters, and that can really cover the most in terms of requirements. But I do think that we having access to data, I hate to say big data, but the truth is that we're getting access to data all the time, more and more of it, but we're not utilizing it yet in terms of shaping experiences for people. And we need to get there. We need to get to a point where we can use that data to know who we talking to, or who are we presenting an interface or an experience to. Hopefully we can get there sometime soon as data and mobile devices become more proliferated or ubiquitous out there. If that makes sense.
I think what I've seen is that most developers are your weird people. And so without UX and reaching out to those minority audiences, we would only be building for that segment, because that's all we know, because that's who they are.
I think what's also very important is that there has to be some kind of mobilization from both ends. In other words, you need to find a kind of a middle ground somewhere that you will pull some of your groups that are so-called on the margin towards a kind of a middle ground, but the designer will also have to take that into account. And I think the easiest way maybe to understand the whole notion of cultural difference is really to look at English simply as a language, where we've become so used to a global world where there are so many differences in terms of culture, language, etc., all of that. And to be able to communicate effectively and to understand each other, we do need some communal area or common area of understanding and experience. And there is pulling in certain directions where sometimes there will be a compromise. Most of the time, actually, there will be a kind of a compromise, because I think it becomes impossible actually to accommodate all kinds of differences in the end.
Yeah, I'd like to comment and maybe pose a contrasting position on that. But I think we're getting to a space where, and I saw an amazing presentation on, on the Service Design Network, where the lady who presented was arguing that we're going into a place where things are becoming modular and actually more granular, and that the kind of things that we're putting out there needs to kind of start fitting in with each other to shape experiences, to shape even products, and that we need to be more collaborative, and things are likely to become more adaptive and permeable when we start looking at a global organization or global culture. I think it's counterintuitive in a sense, but I think that's where it's likely to go, is that we are going to be able to give you a personalized experience based on who you are, where you are, and what your life is all about. So I don't think things are going to become more homogenous. I think it's going to be actually more complex as we go along, but we need to build the tools that can accommodate that. And yeah.
So you're saying you're seeing it moving towards microservices that are then conglomerated individually for each person based on their preferences. I think that's what we're seeing in architecture as well. I mean, computer architecture.
Just to add to that also, I think how it works is going to become standard. But the big question is still the what. What do you offer? What do the guys in the rural areas need versus what a guy in the city needs, for example?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the talks. I have a question which is slightly removed from that. My name is Calvin, by the way. The question is mainly targeted for Werner and Phil. It's more around what's been the key metric outside of money, which has been enough to convince the stakeholders about investment into UX in an organization. So Marco showed a very great diagram of how engaged an organization is and where your UX people are. What would be a great metric after money as to convince actual stakeholders?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on the system or platform you're looking at. I think that slide I showed with the 4 systems, whether it's going to be an intranet, an e-commerce site, a web app, or a marketing website, those would have very different metrics. I think on the intranet side, certainly performance, even though that can translate, it's really about time more than money. So it is about improvements in usability rather than cost savings. Cost savings is a secondary result. On e-commerce, likewise, it's not so much about money. That's an after effect. I think drop-off rates, if you start mapping the workflows that you get from analytics and you look at the journey that people are supposed to follow, you could typically expect to see a big circle becoming smaller, smaller, smaller as
at every step you have 10 to 20 to 30% dropping off, and if all of a sudden there's a big decline, those are the areas you want to measure. So drop-off rates in that case is going to be a big one. Then I think the nature of applications is changing very much in the sense that we have one opportunity to convert a user to use our application. It's becoming an extremely competitive market where for every single type of application you might have 6 competing applications. So that first interaction with the application is super critical, because a person might spend 45 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes on your application. User satisfaction would be the key metric for me on a software as a service, online web app, even a mobile app. If someone is not satisfied in the first minute, first 2 minutes, they're gonna drop off, they're gonna move away, and they're never gonna come back. A last one is loyalty. As we said, we're seeing a shift towards loyalty, and this is becoming the decade of loyalty. If nothing is bothering you about an application, chances are you're not going to look around and look for a different application. Let's say Shazam and SoundOut, both applications that allows you to listen to music. They'll tell you what it is. If nothing frustrates you, you're not going to move away, as long as they find the music and recommend it. Now let's say I really want to whistle, and Shazam's not great at recognizing my whistling. Now there's something that could keep me loyal if they improve on that feature. Otherwise I'm going to go to SoundOut. They can recognize my whistling. So it's about looking at what the customer requirements are that will keep them loyal to the application. What do you want to add to that?
Not really. I think that was pretty good, really. I think that was pretty awesome. The thing about what I want to draw out is the difference between the money and the other metrics. Because ultimately, money is why organizations exist. And so ultimately, your top level goal is going to be financial. It might be cost saving, it might be taxpayer value, or it might be revenue earned, but it's going to be a money goal. But then the list that Werner gives is absolutely awesome, because each one of those things feeds into the money goals in different ways. So for any business, you're going to have a tree, and the tree is probably going to be, the root goal is money, and there are going to be a number of things that are the impacts that you need to make in order to get that money quantity to change. So you're not going to get a better list than the one Werner just gave of how that tree looks for each one of the different kinds of organizations you should be doing. But it's interesting to understand metrics you should be doing. It's interesting to understand the relationship between those things and money. And you're going to have to draw that relationship to make sure that the executives understand the value of those metrics.
Hi. In changing the company's mindset to move towards lean UX or agile UX, you mentioned it's a big mind shift. I want some advice on how to convince them that lean UX and agile UX actually need to be an environment where you're allowed to fail and improve. So to get them to like, I can assume so much, but I can get it wrong, and I'm allowed to, even the developers, that they can build and they're going to have to reiterate. What advice do you have for convincing them to allow that?
Thank you for the question. So, as humans, we inherently scared of the word failure. We've grown up thinking it's a bad thing. Even people who embrace failure feel a bit itchy, scratchy about failure. So, that's just how it is. I tattooed myself, "Be brave," just to remind myself. In organizations, I don't think you can convince them. I think the only way to start delivering the message is to plant a lot of seeds. And much like when you spread a seed packet, a couple of them will grow into flowers and the rest will just die. And maybe you'll even get some weeds that grow too. So you just got to keep doing things and keep putting that idea in. If you're lucky, they'll let you have a pilot project where you can try something and show real results. And you can use that as evidence. Evidence always works really, really well, much better than storytelling. But otherwise, just keep telling stories.
Something else we talk about is can you fail quickly and safely and early? So instead of failing on a 2-year project, is it okay if you fail for 2 weeks? And so often when we go into big corporates and they ask us, right, we want to do Scrum, we say, is it okay if your dev team doesn't deliver anything for 6 months? They probably will, but you need to be okay that they don't do something for 6 months. It needs to be that important to you to change before we'll actually teach them Scrum. So we check that before we even start. And that's about, is it okay, failing in the short term, that's going to give you a long-term benefit. So maybe you want to look at that as, we actually are failing on the long term. Is it worth taking some short-term failure to improve? You can't get better without trying something new, and you can't try something new without failing.
Yeah, I wanna completely add on to that. I think the world's changing very quickly, and if you're not a company that's looking how you can change with it and change with it all the time and iteratively, then you really, in a few years, you're going to be in trouble. You just look at the examples out there and how technology and the world we're living is affecting how products and businesses and services are being approached. You know, when you're in the industrial era, it was fine to put something out there and put it in the mom and pop shop and everybody will buy it. But and you can expect to have dominate the market for decades even. You know, we're not in that space anymore. They need to look at you know, where the world is at the moment, and it requires, it necessitates companies to be iterative in how they innovate and redesign and rethink their products over and over and over again, because the market is so dynamic and complex and changing all the time. It's just a no-brainer for me.
And if that doesn't work, there's probably a Gartner study that tells you you should do it.
Everybody, one last question before we close.
Oh, mine's not really a question. It was just to add to what you guys are just talking about. You said Gartner at the end, but I found in my experience just mentioning that this is an industry standard, the approach is recognized, often helps in convincing.
Hi, just around implementing Scrum and Agile, you were saying a moment ago that you may suggest to someone that their developers wouldn't be productive for 6 months, or maybe the reality is 3 months, as they begin to implement this and they fail. We're a small team. There's 10 people in the company, 7 people in the production team. We've been trying to move towards a more agile process, haven't really gotten it right. But if we were to not be productive for 3 months, the company would close. So what would you recommend for a small team wanting to move to a more agile process or to implement Scrum? How would you do that? How would you take on that failure without tanking the company?
Hi, thanks for the question. So the 6-month failure rule is important for big corporates to hear. For much smaller companies, you have a lower pain threshold. You also have a lot less red tape. So for you, we'd probably say you have to be able to fail for a month. So be prepared to deliver nothing for the first 2 sprints, 1 month, and then you'll probably be delivering a lot more than you were previously.
And it's not necessarily because we expect the teams to fail for that long. But if you've got a business critical deadline in a month's time, then you can't give the team the message that it's okay to fail and learn. And the most important thing in the first couple of sprints is it's okay to fail and learn. And usually in big corporates it takes longer to learn, and so they need a longer buffer. If you're a small organization of 10 people, it really should be pretty easy for you to do Scrum. In fact, you might find it quite natural to your way of working anyway, because most people in small companies are willing to do everything and whatever's necessary to get it done. I would just get some training and start. A lot of people don't actually know what Scrum is because they've never had formal training. And so you try with a stand-up meeting, but that's not Scrum.
Well, thank you very much, speakers, for your time, for the chats today and the talks, as well as presenting today. I think it's been an awesome experience so far, and I know some of you are pretty tired. Well, you look pretty tired. Yeah, I just wanted to say, thank you for the speaks. One thing, though, that I'd like to mention to everybody is, please don't forget that we're doing our GoPro competition tomorrow, or the prize giving. And also, please, one thing that we're really relying on you guys for is the collaboration, and how that's been represented is the survey that you have on the back of your programs. If you could please complete that. You could either leave it on your desk today, or you could bring it along with tomorrow, because I know we're going to see you all tomorrow, unless you're going to Daisy's. And if you could please, you could either give that to us, you could leave it on your desk, or you could scan it and email it, if that's better. So whichever medium, but if we could please have that survey from you and your honest feedback.